My name's Anna McHugh, and I am a content librarian and curator at Red Hat, which is one of the world's first open source software companies. Today, I'm going to talk about content management systems, both for external web users and also internal libraries that you may have at your organization. My role as a librarian and curator at Red Hat is to ensure that our content is relevant, up to date, labeled with meaningful labels, and also is housed in software systems where it can be found and where you can emphasize the most important information. I came to Red Hat about 5 years ago, and I am not a formally trained librarian, although I have always been a huge information nerd. I love hanging out in the stacks of libraries, finding that choice bit of information that's hidden all the way to the back and all the way in the basement. However, as soon as I got to Red Hat, I realized that that kind of inclination was simply not going to serve me. I am responsible for the library on redhat.com, and so that's a collection of documents that is valuable to a wide variety of external users. So we have how-to documentation that is for developers or system administrators. We have documents that are good for people who are just trying to learn about what open source is and how it functions in the world. When I came on board, I realized that it was very important for us to build robust and easily accessed metadata systems, and also to use that metadata to ensure that search experiences are easy for users. And I'm going to tell you how all of that went down. And I think that it's really important, however, to note that, in this day and age, it can seem that, our vast amount of information is always an asset. There's definitely also an inclination to hang on to every last white paper or every last case study that you authored. However, I think it's very important to razor in on the important information and to establish context throughout the entirety of one's collection to make sure that you're connecting users not just with the totality of information, but saying, here, this thing on the top, this is the most relevant, the most trustworthy. Because given the rapid amount of content that we create, and how rapidly also the subject matter of that content tends to evolve, it's very, very important to be able to do that. Additionally, I think that it's really important in terms of our move toward an all-remote workforce. Now, Red Hat has always been anywhere between 30 and 40% remote, at least in the time that I've been there. And so when, COVID came and we started to work remotely, we already had some really good practices in place. That being said, one of the things that my team took a look at almost immediately in terms of our new, supporting mission is the GitLab Remote Manifesto. And this is sort of an adjunct to the Agile Manifesto, which essentially establishes a set of principles and ideas where teams that are interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary teams can build products together in a rapid and iterative fashion. Now, this is a very, dynamic way to work, but you also need to have excellent communication between team members. And so, very frequently, a lot of the practices that develop around Agile involve a lot of meetings, a lot of regular communication of what is in your way, what kinds of changes the business has given you that changes the software, changes the project that you're creating. Now, in order to extend that, GitLab has, brought forth a couple of really interesting sort of principles that can help Agile teams also adapt to an all-remote environment. First of all, and before anything else, inclusion and transparency are paramount. And I think that, the work that I do is really important in establishing that, because transparency and inclusion really begins with everyone having a certain understanding of where information can be found and what a source of authority is. Additionally, good documentation is very important. You don't have the opportunity to necessarily job shadow somebody if you're in a remote environment. So good documentation, not necessarily comprehensive documentation, but the documentation that will help people get through their jobs every single day is super duper important. And so I think that, this is an area where we can really flourish, not only in terms of creating documentation, but ensuring that the documentation that is the most important again, rises to the top. Finally, asynchronous communication. I think this is going to be one of the ongoing challenges that teams grapple with and cope with, kind of regardless of their circumstances. You have teams that are global, people working at all hours of day or night as the earth turns. We have people with a variety of differing needs as far as their working styles. And it's very important to foster that flexibility, especially because, at the core of this manifesto and Agile is valuing the humanity and valuing the collaboration that comes out of people who feel like they are valued, feel like they are empowered to create change when it's necessary. So I think that the work that I do is really critical in fostering all of these things. And as a result, of course, I take it very seriously. Now, I am not suggesting that everybody who is a trained librarian should, drop their books immediately and run off and become a sysadmin, because that would both be impractical and probably not very good for the overall quality of the sysadmins that are available for hire. No, instead, I think it's really important for us to focus on what we're good at, which is creating good labels, but also becoming very familiar with our tools. So, one of the things that I think is really instrumental in my job is I serve as a sort of midway point between the business stakeholders. So these are the people who are building the website, people who are building technology products that, that we're trying to bring to market, and the developers and the IT operations folks who run our infrastructure, who run our websites, who build our content management systems and other systems of record. So I very frequently hear from people in the business who have, concrete concerns and considerations, but they don't understand and shouldn't have to understand how the software works to explain what kinds of features they want or what problems they're experiencing. On the other side of the house, the developers don't necessarily know what the business priorities are or, have necessarily the skills to tease that out. Now, project managers can help, but also, again, somebody who understands the business context of the content, but also the systems in which it's housed and how those things can be built and modified is a really valuable thing. So, very frequently when I'm talking with people, I think that there's a lot of real interest in and a lot of very promising developments in the level of sophistication that we have with search algorithms and, creating personalized experiences. A wide array of really interesting tools to connect people with the knowledge that they need. However, there is I think, significant role, at least at this point, for human decision-making and the ability of humans to discern the, what is trustworthy, what is expert, and what is authoritative, far better than machines at this point. I think that the reCAPTCHA project is a really good example of how, computers and software systems and also, the human intellect can work together to, basically harvest and create more rich textured information. So reCAPTCHA essentially is just digital scans of, books that haven't been digitized. And then they're presented in a sort of distorted fashion, and users use them to authenticate and to get into websites, demonstrate that they're not bots. Now this information is fed back into this massive digitization project, which really feeds, the growth of overall knowledge and serves a very important need. I think it's also a good illustration of one of the things that human beings are very good at that machines aren't necessarily so good at, and that is looking at things and interpreting images, especially, distorted images, or for that matter, distorted or symbolic or metaphorical speech. So the human mind is really good at understanding that kind of information, and you can bake that into the algorithms and the different tools that you use to essentially, again, build that context, build that understanding that you have of value and what people are trying to learn, but also what you're trying to say. Because, no collection of documents is actually fully objective. You are saying something, especially if you're talking about a website for a company. Now, some people will, occasionally poo-poo the role of human beings in the organization of such collections of information. And my counterpoint to that would be that even Google understands, the value that human beings bring to these sorts of complementary activities, building knowledge environments that take into account some of the more qualitative factors of the content itself. So, one of the things that I find to be fascinating about Google's work is that they have quality rater guidelines. So basically, it's a 168-page document that is for human beings, and they sit down and they read a website and they compare it against a rubric of different measures of what quality is and how, again, to assess and evaluate how a website behaves and performs and how basically it should rank in search. And there are three main factors that are very important that are also very difficult for machines to discern. And I think these are also really the three critical things that determine whether or not information that we encounter in digital environments is valuable. Expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So essentially, the entire set of activities that a quality rater goes through is to identify the level to which a page represents those things. This becomes increasingly important when you're talking about websites that potentially have a lot of implications of using that information. So medical websites, financial services, etc. So all of the human feedback is fed into the Google algorithm so that there is sort of a continual building of a set of understandings of where those fault lines are in terms of what makes something authoritative, what makes a voice expertise, and more than anything else, what is trustworthy? Because that's the most important thing that we're trying to parse on the internet or really anywhere. So stepping back from all of that crazy stuff, I'm going to tell you the story about how my job came to be and how I came to, spend the last 5 years at Red Hat going from a chaotic document library in a very, very disorganized content management system hosted in Drupal to what I would like to think is a more robust, more flexible system that people also have access to data that is meaningful, both on the outside and internal users. So this is a quick timeline. We aren't actually dancing bears at Red Hat, although we do occasionally have a reputation as party animals. When I was hired in 2014-2015, we were just moving on to Drupal from an earlier content management system. So the new redhat.com had a library that I essentially on my first day inherited. And I said, my goodness, this is rather large. And my boss, said, well, yes, part of your work is going to be sorting out, what's good content and what we need to get rid of. And I said, well, that should be relatively easy. We just pick a date and we archive things that are older than that date, more or less. And she said, aha, this is the difficulty. When we migrated our content into Drupal, it put the same time and date stamp on all of these things. This is a perfect example of the unintended consequences of building cool new stuff. But as a result of that, it also became very clear that our first order of business was going to be going through the content and auditing it, making sure not just that we were getting rid of the things that are no longer relevant, but more importantly, that we were developing a strategic system for managing and labeling that content and future content so that we'd be able to create a system that had a little bit of coherency to it. So, 2014, 2015 was kind of getting my legs under me and, working on some of this auditing. 2016, additionally, we spent a lot of time not just auditing content, but also starting to work on our content management system itself. And so developing a far more sophisticated taxonomy, working to, develop on-site search mechanisms, and also incorporate some of our organic strategy. 2017 and 2018 were characterized by getting additional access to data outside of the content management system and marrying it up. So the best example of this is that we were able to create content segments using our inventory. And so, say for instance, we could gather a list of assets or a list of white papers about Linux, which is one of the primary things that Red Hat is in the business of. And we could marry that up with the data analytics that are used to measure the performance of content. This was really helpful to us because we were able to understand what's working, what's not, and also have an understanding of what users are trying to get to so that we make sure that information is what we focus on in terms of making sure it's up to date. And then in 2018 and 2019, we started to also branch out into some sort of homebrew technical solutions, so we could take these different sources of data and bring them together. We also started to do hacks and workarounds so that we could use our taxonomy to do some personalization and other interesting activities. And additionally, in 2019-2020, we built and launched a digital asset management system as a software as a service. So we were moving off of a far more traditional sort of file management platform onto something that's available in the web browser. And we built the entire search experience around that and around the specific collection that we were trying to present to people. So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of the main things that we had to get done before we could make any progress on the cool things like tying our performance data together with our content and metadata. First of all, we had to audit that content and also look at the metadata. Not only what labels were on things and ensuring that we cleaned up that all of those records, but also making sure that the taxonomy itself was in good shape. Now, if you're not familiar with the term taxonomy, I'm just going to back out really quick and explain it. More or less, taxonomy is just classified information. Dad jokes aside, essentially it is just a organizational system where you have a hierarchy of information. So you have a parent level category and child terms underneath it. So in the case of Red Hat, we have topics is one of our parent level categories. We have Linux, we have cloud computing, we have DevOps and security. So you're basically able to say, okay, this is a dimension of the content. This is a label that I want. And here's a controlled list of selections that people have. Now, sometimes people feel, users can say, well, I'd love to be able to use keywords because I can be descriptive and, it'll be easier for people to find the content if it's a very specific bit of information. I find a controlled list of taxonomies that are also developed sort of strategically alongside the business and the collection to be far more effective. So you have to, audit your content, audit your metadata. You also have to ensure that that data continues to be accessible and also has high integrity. So, if you have to pass the torch to a different person who's going to become responsible for publishing content, impressing upon them the importance of good labeling and tagging is critical. So when I first started at Red Hat, we had, again, this idea that it's going to be relatively easy to get me up to speed, and we were going to, be able to sort of smoothly transition to this new platform where we were hosting our content, so Drupal specifically. And it became very clear that we just had a lot of different problems. Everything from, the records without the time and date stamps on them, to, information that was simply out of date and needed to be looked at by people who are technical, owners of the content, people who are experts on Red Hat products and open source technology. So over the course of the first year and change that I was working at Red Hat, we eliminated nearly 2,500 PDFs that were either out of date, no longer relevant, basically what you would call content rot, which is, information that is redundant, outdated, and even worse than everything else, trivial. So that was the focus. And on an ongoing basis, as a practice, we quarterly will audit content. And so our method for doing this essentially is we say anything that's older than a certain amount, so in our case, 18 months, needs to be audited if it does not meet certain performance benchmarks. So we need to ensure that the content is, actually of interest to people to, again, get rid of the trivial things and emphasize the things that are more important to our users. But also to just give us a gut check of 18 months later, is this still relevant? In the technology industry, very frequently we have to retire things far before 18 months. So we have a window of time, basically, 3 years to 18 months of age. We look at the performance of the content itself. Anything that's older than 3 years, someone has to scream and yell and holler to not have us archive it. Now, occasionally we will have people who are owners who are really good at communicating no, this technology is actually stable enough, or this is a product that some of our users have that we need to keep around. That said, auditing on an ongoing basis is really, really important to us. I will attempt to use my slides in the correct direction. So not just auditing content, obviously that was one of the first things that I really dug my teeth into, but in the building and then the maintenance of the Drupal system, and then subsequently our internal digital asset manager, we realized that access to data in a very simple CSV format was probably the most valuable feature that our developers delivered for us. You could have all of the wonderful flexibility in, how large your mosaic display is, or how people scroll, or how they build a collection for themselves. There are lots of wonderful things that can be done with software. But at the end of the day, in order to actually create a system that people can use and to be sure that the information that's stored in it is relevant, you need to be able to pull records out. That is inclusive of the metadata that you have. In Drupal, we don't have a very sophisticated list of the metadata that we, include. One of the primary use cases that we have is we basically build an inventory. It's a Google Sheet. It's super simple. It has the name and, the type of content that the item is, also its publication date, and then all of the taxonomies are usable as filters. So you can filter by topics and by products and by product lines and a variety of other parent terms. Additionally, we took our analytics data out of Adobe Analytics and also out of our contact database, so, records of sales, and married our inventory of content and our metadata from our CMS up with the, web performance and ultimately the business earnings of each individual piece of content. This is super valuable to us because it gives us a chance to say, okay, it's not just a matter of raw popularity. It is also this, contextual understanding of how our content performs. So, for instance, occasionally we'll find something that is a really highly detailed document. And some people say, for instance, in marketing would say there's maybe not so much value to this. However, if we look at it and we say, well, there's only 5 people who downloaded it. However, those 5 people ended up buying $500,000 worth of Linux, it's probably important to ensure that that document stays up to date and that we continue making documents like it. So it's really important to be able to get access to, your the data that's within your content management system. And again, CSV format is really important. I also highly stress that you want to make sure that the values that are separated, comma separated values are great, but occasionally, you can end up with a system where all of your terms are in one list and it becomes very ugly. So, looking at what kind of filtering you're going to want to be able to do and what your other use cases are is really important in that case. When you're building these search experiences, be it for, in my case, redhat.com or, this digital asset manager, one of the few things that I really deeply and fundamentally believe is that a flat taxonomy is very, very important. When I first came on board, we had an internal library, and it was basically set up like a traditional sort of file tree. And it got very, very complex and confusing really rapidly, especially because you had things broken up sometimes organizationally, but sometimes by different products. It was almost impossible to use, and it was very elaborate. Now, it was very logical as far as its hierarchies were concerned, but those hierarchies didn't really make sense together, and they were simply way too deep. And most of the time when you talk to people about taxonomy or you talk with them about metadata, their eyes start to glaze over. Taxonomy to them is reminiscent of, their dorky high school biology teacher. And they think of it also as a deep multi-layered thing. A taxonomy is you start at kingdom and phylum and down to genus and species. And in between there's all kinds of stuff that is almost impossible to memorize. Now, the reality is that a flat taxonomy is oftentimes really intuitive and easy for people to use. On the subject of taxonomies, I think it's important also that, whatever system you're building, being able to modify that taxonomy is very important. So being able to change the parent categories, but most importantly, being able to change the labels on all the records within your system is critical. So for instance, a couple of months ago, I had to remove a product from redhat.com, and all of the records associated with it. We have a feature that's a bulk tagger. So basically, I'm able to go in, delete the term, and the tag essentially falls off all of the records that are associated with that term. So it's a one and done. It takes me 2 seconds. I clear the cache. It, is removed from our content delivery network, and it's a done deal. We have another tool, however, that if you want to get rid of a taxonomy term, you first have to remove that from, that specific term from all of the, documents and records that have that term. So you can understand where we're getting into a little bit of a problem here. So it's very important to have a flexible, flat, lightweight taxonomy, in my opinion. And I'm going to give you a bit of an example, why this might be the case. Because this is my talk and you can't stop me and I can't even see you, I'm going to talk to you about my big hobby, and that is mycology, which is the study of molds, spores, and fungus. I really enjoy hunting for wild mushrooms and messing around with culinary stuff. It's just a great hobby. But one of my favorite parts about it is it's a very taxonomy-heavy discipline as well. There are many millions of, different species of fungi, probably around 1.5 million, and who's counting? And so, there's a very, very rich taxonomy associated with the study. That said, most people, when they're looking for a mushroom or thinking about mushrooms, it's a really basic template, and they have a very specific need. I think this is a good parallel to, the sort of digital library experience I'm trying to provide to people. Even though, as the back-end user and an administrator, I want to be able to look at all of the 7 different names something has had, the front-end user wants something very simple. So let's talk about the shiitake mushroom, probably one of the most popular culinary mushrooms in the world. And because it's so popular, it's been studied for a long time. And as a result of that, it has actually had 7 different classifications, 7 different Linnaean names. Now, if you're super into mushrooms like I am, that's great. And you can, dig through taxonomies and the history, the changelog, all you want, and figure out why people named it that and why they moved it to a different genus, etc., and so on. But for most people, what they're doing in relation to shiitake mushrooms is walking into a store, looking for the produce section, looking for the mushrooms, and then looking for the bin that is labeled shiitake. So I'd like to, propose that information environments, digital information environments, especially for, web users who can be pretty much anybody in the world, should be simple, they should be straightforward, and as much as you may be an expert and have, really relish developing these complex but very nuanced ways of getting information, you're usually not actually doing your audience a service. So as a result of auditing our content, also getting access and ensuring that the data in our systems had integrity, and then, working to sort of understand the overall value that our audience finds in the content, we're able to do some optimization work. So at Red Hat, about 2/3 of our revenue comes originally from contacts that we make in organic search. Now, because a lot of the materials that we create are sort of old-fashioned, we have a lot of PDFs, we've been making an effort to publish these kinds of documents in HTML. Now, when we do that, the traffic for those particular pieces tends to be anywhere between 10 and 15 times the amount that a traditional PDF would get, especially for organic traffic. And this allows us also to sort of grow our information ecosystem for specialized topics that come from sort of our technical teams. So in looking at this information of, our metadata, we're able to identify, okay, what are the things that people are interested in? What are the things that maybe we don't have quite enough on? And then we use that to migrate that content and make sure that it is created and published in HTML first. We also have a content analysis program, so we're able to, work with different campaigns. We have an editorial board, and we have a couple of different, programs that are designed to, project and to articulate Red Hat's position, especially on a particularly interesting, element of open source software. So we're able to, perform analyses. My team has done somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 of them, and we split them up by all kinds of things. So, if you are the owner of a particular product, we can give you an analysis of your content. If you are working within one of our vertical teams, so, say for instance, you work with telecommunications, we can talk to you about the performance of your telecommunications content that is published in French, and you're interested in organic traffic instead of conversion traffic and people buying things. So this level of nuance and detail is really helpful. And it allows us to, understand and analyze our content, and really start to also wrap our heads around what are we known for, and are we saying the things that we want to say? And going back to, Google's principles around expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, seeing the kind of content that people access will give you a sense of whether or not you are, in fact, delivering the kind of message that you want. And if not, then you can refocus. Another thing that we have done that's really helped, I think, the entire business sort of understand metadata and participate in the development of, our content software is our metadata governance committee. So we meet on a monthly basis. It's an open meeting. Anyone can attend, and we often do have people from the business or, software developers who are working on our, business applications who attend. And we just basically talk about new terms that we want to add to our taxonomies, or terms we need to remove, or disambiguation we need to do. And so, it's an open forum on a monthly basis where people can bring to the table their need for new metadata, or even just a need to be able to find content a little more easily that maybe we should design a label for. So we do that on a monthly basis. It's very open, very collaborative, and it's very much the Red Hat way. It also is an opportunity for us to form relationships with people and to basically demystify the idea of metadata and being sort of a business stakeholder and building, like web applications or search applications, content management systems, etc. And then a couple of days after our open collaborative fiesta, the librarians and owners of the different tools get together. We, update the tools that are relevant. We keep a change log, and we also maintain a data dictionary. And we do that every single month. So every time we change something, we have a really clear record of what we did and why we did it. So I also want to talk about, I think the character of the work that I do and the things that I find to be inspiring. I think the very first thing that I discovered is I was not going to be, again, just an organizer of content, but that I was going to be really closely involved with the development of these systems that weren't working very well to ensure that people could find what they want. I'm going to drink some lemonade. All right, that does the trick. So, when I embarked on this journey and I realized, again, that I was going to have some agency to work with the developers and work with the business to improve our systems, I realized almost immediately that I had to take on a technologist's mindset. I had to, and, fortunately, I do have a great deal of enthusiasm for trying new things. And also, I simply love a good search experience. And so, this wasn't rocket surgery for me. But what was new was an understanding that in order to get good at my job, I had to be really good at bug hunting. And there are a couple of reasons for this. I think that, first of all, it is the best way to become familiar with the systems that you're using. And I've seen people walk in the door, with a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, and they come into contact with, a custom content management system, and it's just like, it's like touching a live wire. So I think it's really interesting to delve into a tool as it's been developed for a specific group of users, at the same time as you're looking at the content itself and sort of being a librarian about it. But it's really important to also be that bug hunter. So also you can start to understand where are the limitations of the system, what do we need to document really well. And also it's a chance to say, hey, this is a thing that's busted. How bad is it? And oftentimes the developers will be like, yeah, it is busted and it's really difficult to fix. Is it really that big of a headache for your users? And oftentimes you can find a way to jigger the system so that that need is met without having to create these, elaborate technical solutions that can be very simply dealt with in another way. I love the fact that in my job, if something is broken or someone can't find something, it is always my turn. So if they can't find something because of a server timeout, it's my turn. If someone can't find something because it's labeled wrong, it's my turn. If, content hasn't been audited appropriately, so old content is rising to the top because it's been popular forever, and the thing that's new and shiny is sitting in the bottom of the drawer, it is also my turn to figure out how to fix that problem. And that may sound daunting, but it's actually wonderful, and it gives you an opportunity to build really rich relationships. There's nothing more satisfying to me than talking to a user who's having a problem but can't articulate what the issue is because they don't spend time in the software, and being able to walk over to the technical team and saying, okay, this is the issue that they have. It involves these different components. These are, I've tested it 5 ways from Sunday, so I've verified that it is actually broken. Is it something we need to fix? And if so, how? I think it's also really helpful when you're, building these roadmaps and trying to develop additional features, because there's oftentimes a temptation to, adopt, and this is from the business side in my experience, pretty elaborate search experiences. And, they're like, we're going to have this very, very specific set of filters that people are going to use, and we'll have, comprehensive documentation and a user guide. And I love to bring people back to the reality of the paradox of the active user. People are going to jump into your software right away and start using it. And one of the first things that almost everybody is going to start doing almost immediately, no matter what the software is try to find things. Now, of course, in an information environment, that's really all you are doing is uniting people with the knowledge that they need. But I think it's really fun to put yourself in the position of a user and say, okay, I am going to behave the way that I ought to in a digital space, which is if I cannot get the information that I need, that kind of denigrates the quality of the experience, and that makes me want to find another source of information, in addition to the inconvenience of not being able to navigate the system cleanly. So I think that, articulating this is oftentimes very helpful for business your business stakeholders to hear. I think one of the most valuable sources of information and input that you could have when you're trying to build information systems and environments is the projects and the problems and the pains of your passionate amateurs. So I'm talking about the people who will hack together a solution to a crummy problem that they have in the content management system because they need to get their work done, and they're always looking for new and exciting ways to get around the hurdles that they encounter. I think that also it gives you a sense of where people are willing to put their efforts. That gives you an additional sense of what is very valuable to them and what you need to be able to provide in terms of a user experience. On my team, that person is Brian. When Brian first came to us, he was really excited to bring together the analytics information and the information from our content management system to build these inventories and provide people with greater access to our content, greater insight into what was working. But he wanted to take it further. He wanted to make it easy for people to submit requests for content to be published and to label their content appropriately and have it go into our project management system and then subsequently into publishing in a smooth and automated fashion. So he built a Google form that we could basically use to take in that information and put it into the software where we basically manage all of our tasks. He also used similarly that data to send automated notifications to people who own content after 3 and after 6 months of that content being published. Because it's super important to be able to say, okay, what's working, what isn't. And ultimately, he wasn't able to do that with the tools that we had available. So he wrote a couple of Python scripts. We used, really simple components like Google Forms, and runs the whole thing off of a Raspberry Pi on his desk. And what I would propose to you is you want to find the people who are running the Raspberry Pi, unplug it, tip it over, and shake it, and you will find some really good future features. Because again, the people who are willing to work hard and come up with creative solutions to certain problems are also the people who understand what the biggest problems are. And this is really important because you're going to be, more than likely involved with a project where you have to build software that has been purchased by someone who doesn't necessarily know how software is designed. At this point in time, 40% of the software and technology business, or technology buying power resides with the business units in different organizations. Now, that has its value because, of course, those are the organizations that know exactly what the need is and what their associates are struggling with. However, a lot of times, there are software systems, and software as a service in particular is kind of becoming ubiquitous for these, knowledge management systems of all kinds. They need to be built in a way that is very thoughtful and very straightforward, but also with a full understanding of what's going on under the hood. Now, if you, sort of look at the totality of features that are available, occasionally people who are purchasing software as a service will focus on, the user interface or some of the different tools and configurations. But ultimately, you want to make sure that you can build a collection that has relationships, that ties things together, that basically each individual piece of content that you have functions as a star in a larger constellation that superimposes additional meaning, that basically helps tell your story and helps articulate to your users what you need to convey to them. So this is an example from our digital asset management system that we built in 2019 and have been, adopted business-wide at this point. And one of the biggest challenges that we had was establishing relationships between different pieces of content that were related. So, for instance, people would be looking for a white paper, but they also wanted a digital banner ad, or they wanted, email template copy, something similar. So we built the system to, reflect those relationships and to build very simple publishing mechanisms into the system so it's easy to build those relationships and essentially, again, curate the content in a way that's meaningful and in a way that's flexible and could be reconfigured if necessary. All of that said, one of the great things about software as a service is that you can do all kinds of really interesting things with it. You don't have to worry about hosting it. The vendor takes care of a lot of things. People just go into their browsers and use the tool, and that's all they need. A lot of these different solutions do employ, machine learning, some AI, sometimes natural language processing, in order to sort of execute some of the search and recommendation engines. I will say that those are really cool features. I would not make a single decision based upon them, however. I think it's important to bear in mind that those things are relevant in the future, but more often than not, when I'm looking at a knowledge management system or a CMS, what I'm looking at is something that is difficult to get the information out of. It's difficult to change the labeling system and the organizational structure. And ultimately, the teams are just not ready to use the amount of information that comes out of machine learning and AI algorithms. So I think it's important to consider that, but I also think it's important to, when you're working with people, say we need to focus on the foundational basics. How do we ensure that when a new version of our software releases, that everyone finds the most recent version of documentation and not something that was published 2 years ago? So in conclusion, I want to talk to you very briefly about the 4 things that I consider to be the deliverables of my job, and how I get the information that I need to, execute on those deliverables. First, I have user interfaces for my, content management software. I also have to deliver governance and flexibility. So essentially, building search experiences that have the tools and also the informational flexibility to accommodate new forms of knowledge that come into my collection. So, talking with users and understanding the jobs that they have to get done is absolutely critical. Also, talking with people about taxonomy and metadata is important. And it's something that, again, may be intimidating to people at first, but usually when you explain it as a good labeling system, you will get people interested in it because people love to go from the vague to the specific, especially if it means that the things they put effort into writing or creating get used. Now, when you start to get more advanced and things are, more sophisticated, working on application integration, bringing data from different applications together, and also managing and analyzing organization-wide data becomes instrumental. So a lot of that work comes in understanding how different software systems connect. And so, in our case, we're building a virtual data infrastructure that sort of collects all the information that's coming out of our different software systems and also makes it easily accessible so little API connections can be built. You have loosely coupled applications throughout our environment. And then ultimately, at the base layer, you can pull all of our enterprise data out and, slice it, dice it, analyze it using some very sophisticated techniques. But again, that data access and integrity, making sure that things are, tidy and prioritized for truth is, I think, one of the primary things that I bring to the table and that my team works to achieve. Now, this is truth happens is one of the watchwords at Red Hat. Our CEO, Paul Cormier, is really fond of saying that we simply don't understand what the truth is going to be in the future. We only understand the truth that is now, but it is constantly happening. It's constantly evolving. This is why we participate in open source. We like things to go rapidly. We love innovation. We love learning where we're wrong and improving. And I think one of my favorite quotes about the understanding of change and how truth and how, authority and expertise can shift over time is the statement that Bill Gates made in the 80s about how 640K is about as much computing power as anyone could ever possibly want. We all know, especially Bill Gates knows, that that is not the case. Now, I appreciate your time very much. At the very end of the day, I think that my job is rewarding because I have an opportunity to work with software, work with people who work with software, and work on search experiences with an eye toward ensuring that, we're communicating not just in a comprehensive way, but in a meaningful, trustworthy way. I appreciate your time. I welcome you to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions, and I hope you have a magnificent day.